Why do you think then that China have, I guess, taken the stance that they have with regards to Russia and Ukraine? It seems that they're not necessarily against it, they're not necessarily for it. They've put themselves in a little bit of a predicament. Why do you think that is, and how do you see that playing out over the course of the next year, 2 years?
Well, I might just disagree with you a little bit, William, because I think that China has rather clearly shown that it is supporting Russia in different ways, in spite of, the obvious violations of international sovereignty and possibly even international humanitarian law, which we see unfolding in this tragic situation with Ukraine. But you asked the right question, and that is, why would China do this? And I think we can get back maybe to what we were just talking about a moment ago. I think it has to do with their ambition and the pathways which Chinese leaders believe they must take in order to achieve those ambitions. So I suppose first and foremost is that China sees in its relationship with Russia a valuable ally, a valuable friend, a valuable partner, which can serve China in its competition with the United States. China understands very, very well that to achieve its great rejuvenation, as they call it, to achieve the aims which Xi Jinping has set for the country, it's going to have to go through the United States to get there. So any partnership or friendship or relationship, alliance, whatever you want to call it, which China believes can serve that purpose of either distracting the United States or serving as a counterbalance to the United States in a variety of ways, military, political, economic, diplomatic, that is a useful friend, a useful partner. Beyond that, I think, too, that there's some normative or even almost ideological elements to China's support for what Russia's doing. In part, a sort of affinity, if you will, between their form, China's form of authoritarian governance, and that which is similar in Russia. And the need in Beijing's mind to point to these forms of governance as being legitimate. That there isn't one size fit all. We are not at the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama predicted 20, 30 years ago, but that in fact different forms of governments, and namely single-party, authoritarian governance, can be successful, have legitimacy, and deserve respect. And so supporting Russia, in a way, helps uphold that principle, and in so doing, Beijing hopes, grants China a sort of form of legitimacy that it craves, quite honestly, within the international system. So those two. I mean, there are other reasons. I mean, China just generally is unhappy with American leadership. Our alliance network, American alliance network, has grievances, of course, with NATO, dating back to the Yugoslavian wars, in which the Chinese embassy was mistakenly attacked by NATO warplanes as part of that conflict. There's a lot of grievance. There's a lot of grievance there in the way that China currently looks at the world. And it's all getting manifested now in the way that it's decided to respond in ways that I think are largely supportive of Russia, if not overtly, but still certainly not opposed to what Russia's doing.
Should democratic nations such as the US, such as Australia, much of the Commonwealth, should they be concerned by China and Russia almost teaming up to, I guess, put forward their autocratic systems? Is that something we should let happen, and just, I guess, allow them to operate by their way of life? Or is it something that we should be concerned about to the point that there is some involvement that we should take?
That's a great question, William. And I personally think that in some ways, more than, let's say, a traditional military threat or challenge to the West, or a traditional sort of economic threat or challenge to the West, we are increasingly facing what we might call an ideational or maybe even ideological challenge to the West, which I do think we need to be concerned about. Why? Well, I don't foresee the likelihood that, say, in the same way that we feared in the Cold War era, that China or Russia are likely to try to undertake a kind of global competition to subsume, the liberal democratic system and impose their own. There may well be examples coming out of Russia of this, and we see it very clearly with Ukraine. But I don't quite see that as China's approach. Rather, the concern is, well, it's multifold. One is, as we said, an effort to legitimize, to make normal and acceptable governance systems which are basically single-party, authoritarian, abusive of human rights, dismissive of civil liberties, and the like. I think we do have at least some moral obligation to want to resist that. Secondly, the degree to which then that way of doing business or that way of governing finds an extension beyond Chinese borders, not to sort of undermine or overthrow another government, but simply to meddle or to extend the long arm of the Chinese system in ways that interfere with liberal, democratic, or any government system. And there would be many, many examples of this, and Australians know them pretty clearly. That's something we should resist and not accept as legitimate or welcome. And then the third way, just to be very quick here, I think we're also seeing within international institutions, and the United Nations may be the best example, some evidence of authoritarian governments like China and Russia trying to put in place within a multilateral organization like the United Nations norms, agendas, even standard setting. Say, for example, within the International Telecommunications Union, which is a UN body, norms, principles, agendas, standards, which are more consistent with authoritarian government preferences than would be in the liberal democratic systems. Putting economic development ahead of human rights, for example, or introducing more state-centric control standards for the use of the internet or the press, for example. These things are happening. And while we don't see them, and it's not at the same sort of profile or level of threat that maybe we all perceived during the Cold War coming out of the Soviet Union, they're happening. And they have the potential of eroding some of the norms and ways of governing that we, I think, value. So we need to be more aware of them and resist them where we can.